Okay, welcome to our viewers. This is a series on a book by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce. And this book has been hugely impactful to me and a lot of other people in the church. And a big part of why we're doing this series is we want to make it possible for other church members to benefit from this book. And I'm joined here by Jeff Benyon, who has done a number of videos with me on this channel, but also Allyson Matsoso. Ally, tell us about yourself.
Oh, okay. I am a big fan of C.S. Lewis and particularly this book. So I've researched and read a lot about it, and I just really am excited to talk about it today. I have a website called The Philosophy of Motherhood. I've done some writing for Public Square and Deseret News and some other places. But I'm just excited to talk about the book because as Jeff said, I'm a super fan.
I am too. and I've said before, this book it impacted me greatly. In the things that I've written for Public Square and other places, you'll see the influence of this book over and over and over again. But my first time going through the book, I had a hard time understanding it. I had a hard time making sense of it. And so I actually benefited from going online and watching short videos that people did explaining the book. And, then I could kind of see, okay, I see how this story is being told. And I was able to actually make sense of the book after that. So this series is an effort to do that for Latter-day Saints specifically. Okay, so let's get started. All right. Now, the book, The Great Divorce, is a response.
The title.
Yes.
The title
of the book, The Great Divorce, is in response to a book by William Blake called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
And I do have to say the title probably put me off reading it at first, because why do we want to talk about divorce?
Right.
Nobody's favorite topic,
Right. So right off the bat, let's inform viewers that this book is not about divorce. It's not.
It's not about marriage much. A little bit.
It's really not. So the title might be a little bit jarring, but this book it's not about divorce. It's about something else. Now, William Blake was a romantic writer. He took an approach to questions of faith that was it's hard to describe kind of what the romantic cultural spirit is, but it's intense.
It's a little unrooted, sentimental. So
yes.
You go where you felt.
Right.
Kind of. That's probably unfair. So oversimplification, but
yeah. But
feelings and aesthetics and yeah.
Right. So he wrote a book called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And what he said in that book basically was that heaven and hell are two sides of the same coin. All right. They exist together. They can't exist without each other. So he's trying to, put forward this disruptive paradigm about heaven and hell. And that's typical of people who take a romantic approach to religion. Let's try to disrupt things and be super innovative and provocative and emotive and so forth.
And everything old is new again. So honestly, to me, this sounds a lot like the ancient Christian heresy of Manichaeanism, which is a form of dualism, which we don't need to get into too much philosophy. People will fall asleep. But dualism basically says heaven and hell are equal. And for you modern people, Star Wars articulates this really well, right? The goal in Star Wars isn't to have good prevail. It's to bring balance to the Force. So that's a perfect example of a dualistic philosophy.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's interesting because William Blake, he was seen as kind of mad by a lot of people in his time. He was an artistic genius, but he also it's interesting that he wasn't thrown in chains as a heretic, but when you read some of the stuff he wrote, you're like, man, they were maybe a little more forgiving than we give credit to people back then, because some of his ideas were pretty revolutionary for their time, and they have, like you said, kind of dualistic, almost yin yang kind of dark and light. We need both in order to, they're equal but opposite, but both needed. And so he was not appreciated by a lot of people in his time. But it's, when you look at The Great Divorce, it's an answer to that. But in a lot of ways, as I read it, it's not very similar to Blake's book at all. It's more like in the mode of, I would say, Divine Comedy, or Paradise Lost.
It owes a lot to Dante, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think he is trying, the reason he says the title is The Great Divorce is trying to say, no, they're not like joined, they're not married, they're divorced. They're very different.
Heaven and hell are not together married, like William Blake was saying. They are very much different.
Yes.
And they don't need to go together. Heaven does not require hell. Maybe that's the best way to put it, which C.S. Lewis puts a lot more eloquently, but C.S. Lewis is adamant, and I think that's why he picked this title. Heaven, it depends on nothing to hell. Hell has no claim on heaven.
Yes.
And nobody in hell has any claim on anyone in heaven.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
They're not equals in any sense.
Right.
And he makes that very clear. I love that is a theme going through the book, trying to show that hell is just a flea bite compared to the joy of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Very good. So let's begin by talking about the preface of the book. And I'm going to read just a couple little segments from the preface here. C.S. Lewis says, "It is still either or. If we insist on keeping hell or even earth, we shall not see heaven. If we accept heaven, then we shall not be able to retain even the smallest and most intimate souvenirs of hell." He's kind of planting a flag for the reader, right? He's saying, you have choices to make. And these choices are going to be exclusive. If you choose heaven, you will exclude hell and its influences from your life. You can't just have them both like the romantics imagine, right? They are oil and water. They will drive each other apart, okay? And you will have to choose one or the other. He says, "I think earth, if chosen instead of heaven, will turn out to have been all along only a region in hell." It's a very powerful statement. So right off the bat, let's think about one of the things that he's trying to do here. And when we talk about heaven and hell, so in mainstream Christianity, people typically envision heaven and hell as places that you go to after you die.
Like a physical place.
Yeah. Yes. You die, you get judged, you get selected to either go to heaven or go to hell. Okay. C.S. Lewis is painting a very different picture for us here. He's saying that these are things that we are developing right now, paradigms and tendencies and thought processes that reflect either heaven or hell. We're doing this right now, okay? It's not something, you don't have to wait till you get judged to, cultivate the mentality of heaven or the mentality of hell. You're doing it right now, every single day, okay? Very, very different perspective than, I'm just going to live life, see what happens, and then see how I get judged and where I get sent to.
And it's something we choose rather than God sending us to.
Correct.
I'm sure God has a role in all this, obviously, but and maybe we just go to the next slide, Dan, to see how it starts. But it starts with choosing to get on the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Allie, any more thoughts on the preface?
Well, yeah, I mean, just this either or relation. I think you're absolutely right. And one theme that I see through the book as we get into the characters is that all of them are kind of presented with a choice where they have to choose either or, and they're presented with goodness and truth in its pure form, and we get to see if they are able to leave their old self behind and go to goodness. And some well, a lot don't, and so that's kind of, he's giving each of the characters that choice so that we can see, when I read it, I feel like I see myself in each of the characters. I think that's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because it's kind of a book where you're in purgatory with these people. And this is the time where you can pick either way, because that's kind of the idea of purgatory, even though it's kind of complicated. But in Lewis's mind,
give us a basic sense of what that means, purgatory, the idea of purgatory.
The Catholic idea of purgatory, if you look at, let's just go to the Divine Comedy. He has 3 books. Okay, there's Inferno, which is everyone's favorite. There's it's in hell. It's really kind of gruesome, and
it's very vivid.
Yeah, very vivid. I actually personally like Purgatorio because that, to me, it's very similar to what we're about to read in terms of there is suffering there, but it's going to be for their good, right? So anyone who enters purgatory will leave. Now, C.S. Lewis didn't believe that. He thinks this kind of gray town that we go to and the beginnings of heaven, I think, are his kind of purgatory where we get to choose at that point what we're going to do. And that's where we live on earth right now. We're all kind of in purgatory, meaning we're not in hell yet, and we're not in heaven. There is this space where we get to have glimpses of goodness, and we get to choose if we're going to do our way, if we're going to be rebels to the end. Milton is mentioned in the book, which is Paradise Lost, which he even quotes Milton, which it's basically the idea is, would you rather serve in heaven or reign in hell? And I think that's the choice that we see again and again. Is it our way or is it God's way?
And we should say, Lewis, I don't think really liked Milton or his Paradise Lost. He said once, if you read Paradise Lost, you need to wake up with a good Sunday morning's hatred of Satan. He thought it was a little too sympathetic to Satan. I might disagree with Lewis on that, but anyway, that's another. We could do one of these on. Well, he
does seem really cool, right? Like Satan is the cool guy.
He is.
I've started reading his preface to Paradise Lost. But yeah, I mean, I think he sees the genius in it. But
yeah, it is a genius
definitely work, in his book he phrases it differently than Milton did. Yeah,
very good. So we start with the point of view of a narrator, okay, and he is beginning in this gray, sort of dreary town, and people there line up at a bus stop, and the story of the Great Divorce is about these gray souls, and they are called ghosts.
Later on, they're called ghosts. Yeah.
Yes, they're going to be called ghosts. These are souls that are in hell. Okay.
When he doesn't call it hell at this point, you don't know this is hell, and it's certainly not Dante's vision of hell. There's no screaming, there's no fiery lakes, there's no torture, at least unless it's self-inflicted.
Right.
But there's a lot of bickering. There's a lot of not being able to get along, which I think is very insightful.
Yes. So these people, they line up and they get on a bus. And what we're going to find is that the bus takes them to a zone that is kind of, I guess you could say it's sort of on the outskirts of heaven. Okay. And they're going to meet with souls who are spirits. And later on, we're going to kind of hear of this distinction between ghosts and spirits. But first, let's look at one of the conversations that they have as they're reflecting on where they've been in this sort of gray and dreary town. So the narrator is having a conversation with another one of the ghosts. And the ghost says, the trouble is that they're so quarrelsome. Remember, Jeff said people argue constantly. They can't stand each other in this town. As soon as anyone arrives, he settles in some street. Before he's been there 24 hours, he quarrels with his neighbor. Before the week is over, he's quarreled so badly that he decides to move. Now listen to this. You see, it's easy here. You've only got to think a house, and there it is. That's how the town keeps on growing. And the narrator says, leaving more and more empty streets. And this ghost says, that's right. And time's sort of odd here. That place where we caught the bus is thousands of miles from the Civic Center, where all the newcomers arrived from Earth. All the people you've met were living near the bus stop, but they'd taken centuries of our time to get there by gradual removals. So we get this sense that people just can't get along in this place that we're going to find out is hell, this gray, dreary town. And they can imagine things, and those things come about. Like, I imagine a house, and boom, there is the house.
You can move in.
What was that?
And you move right in. Yeah.
Yeah. And you move right in. And so if I'm able to do that, then I can imagine houses that are far away from people that I don't like. And so people are imagining these houses to get away from each other, and they're spread out over these crazy epic distances because they just can't interact with other souls. Right?
Right. And a lot of times they start out, thinking they'll have a community, but they say they just keep fighting and moving further and further. So, and it's funny because in there it says that the houses they build, like a lot of times they have leaky roofs and stuff. So they're not like perfect houses because maybe even their imaginings, they can't make something good. But yeah, just through their interactions with, and this is where it's kind of different than like if you look at Paradise Lost, where the devils are kind of friends with each other. There's not friendship in this gray town. It's everyone's very proud and stubborn there. So
yeah. Now, and this point about being able to imagine a house, well, this is going to emerge as we proceed through the story. In hell, things aren't real. And so
you can think whatever you want.
Yeah, of course you can imagine it because nothing there is real. And so anyway, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We'll need to come back to that concept as we proceed.
Well, and just one thing to mention is, so it's called Gray Town. It's at the point of dusk, right? So it's not quite.
It's perpetually
night.
Dusk, isn't it, Allie?
It's perpetually dusk, but people talk about when the darkness will come, and then when we go to
eventually
heaven,
there is that final judgment in Lewis's, but it's looming. We don't see it, but it's
so
coming.
That's something interesting I thought, because here they're ghosts, but this is before the resurrection. So I just wonder how that would work. But in the next when we go to the borders of heaven, it's almost sunrise. So that's kind of the opposing.
And this is a little unfair to Lewis, but one of the reasons I think this book can resonate so well with Latter-day Saints is it very easily maps on to our idea, which isn't Lewis's, but it's very compatible with our idea of spirit paradise and spirit prison, and where we even sometimes in our folklore or our folk doctrine talk about, missionary work that's happening to the people. How do we minister? And we believe, maybe uniquely, I think it's us and C.S. Lewis that believe you can still repent after this life, after the mortality, and that the time to repent goes up until the resurrection. And so in that space, which includes mortality and then this post-mortal time in paradise and prison, there can still be changing and repentance and time. So we're going to see some of this missionary work that's going to go on in our frame. I'm kind of imposing that on the text, but I think it's okay.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, we'll talk about MacDonald later, but C.S. Lewis was very influenced by George MacDonald, who was definitely a believer in post-mortal progression and things like that. So, yeah, I think his theology was influenced by that.
Yeah.
Yep. So we do read of this, like Ali said, the narrator tells us time seemed to have paused on that dismal moment when only a few shops have lit up and it is not yet dark enough for their windows to look cheering. So in that gray town, you're kind of frozen in time, right? And he says, I never met anyone, but for the little crowd at the bus stop, the whole town seemed to be empty. I think that was why I attached myself to the queue, to the bus line. So they're standing in a bus line. Surroundings are rainy and they're perpetually evening. The town is mostly empty, and people in the line are whiny and complaining. And some people even leave the line.
Yeah, they leave the line. Some people quarrel so much they can't wait for the bus to come.
So they
wander off. Yeah.
Yeah.
People are sort of self-selecting
again
out of even an opportunity to experience any amount of heaven at this point. Right.
One thing, I was surprised when I started reading this book that there's no Satan. Like, you won't see devils or Satan in this book.
You have to read Screw Tape for that.
Right. And so I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's not that Lewis didn't believe in Satan, because he did. But I think the purpose of this book is to help us here on earth in our purgatory, in our time where we can still, shift ourselves, and to see how we make hell of heaven and heaven of hell and those kind of things. So, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's interesting that obviously in the Inferno and other books like this, you'll see a lot of Satan, but you're not going to find him here.
Right. So let's proceed. As they're traveling up to heaven and they're looking down on hell, we start to hear of this distinction between souls in hell that are referred to as ghosts and souls in heaven are referred to as spirits. That's something you'll come across throughout the book. And then ghosts in hell are spaced out over great differences, like we said. The longer they're there, the more they isolate themselves from other souls.
I think Lewis says, when Napoleon's far off, you can barely see him.
Right.
And so Hitler would be, if you could see him wandering around his huge empty house sometimes. Yeah.
Way far away from each other.
Yeah, they had to travel light years to go visit him. And and Napoleon, and he was just going up and down his living room muttering about a battle he lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're able to do this again. They're able to imagine building homes far away from everybody else, because in that place nothing is real. So imagine it and it happens, because it's
and again, in our modern day world, I couldn't help but think, video games can be fun, and we talk about the metaverse and the VR goggles you can buy now. Apple's are $3,500 or something, but you can spend hours designing your avatar to look a certain way, to be a certain way, and it's not real. It has no substance, and we'll see in a minute. Heaven is incredibly substantial in comparison. So I think that's an interesting contrast, and it suggests that those of us that are spending too much time in virtuality might be spending time in hell.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not some magical wonderland that's heavenly.
Very good.
Another thing, just to compare with some other, the Christian idea that many people have of hell being a pit of fire, Dante, Satan is frozen in ice.
Lake.
And, but this, I think, and this is true of Lewis's theology, is that it's not about God punishing us with vindictive punishment. Okay, that's not within his belief system at all. It's that there is suffering in hell, and it's all self-imposed. The door is locked from the inside. Okay, so this is consequences of our choices. It's not sometimes
imposed.
In Catholic reading and things like that, you get more of, it's a punishment being imposed, but that's not what we see here.
Correct. Yeah. Very good. So here we arrive in the outskirts of heaven. Okay. And Jeff mentioned a moment ago that things are substantive here. Okay. It's not like hell. It's not like the gray town where you can just imagine things. Here, things are actually real. And so I want to read what the narrator says. He says, "It was the light, the grass, the trees that were different, made of some different substance, so much solider than things in our country, that men were ghosts by comparison. Moved by a sudden thought, I bent down and tried to pluck a daisy, which was growing at my feet. The stalk wouldn't break. I tried to twist it, but it wouldn't twist. I tugged till the sweat stood out on my forehead, and I had lost most of the skin off my hands. The little flower was hard, not like wood or even like iron, but like diamond. There was a leaf, a young, tender beech leaf, lying in the grass beside it. I tried to pick the leaf up. My heart almost cracked with the effort, and I believe I did just raise it. But I had to let it go at once. It was heavier than a sack of coal. As I stood recovering my breath with great gasps and looking down at the daisy, I noticed that I could see the grass not only between my feet, but through them. I also was a phantom. Who will give me words to express the terror of that discovery? Golly, thought I, I'm in for it this time." Okay, so what we're reading about here is this phantom, this ghost from hell, is trying to interact with real things. Even flowers, leaves, and things like that are incredibly painful and difficult for this ghost to interact with. Okay, so what is the message here?
Well, it's interesting because they're called ghosts and then spirits, but even more often than spirits, Lewis calls the heavenly kind of messengers solid people. So
yeah, that's right. The solid people.
The solid people. I think it's his way of showing this is reality. Heaven is reality. And this ghostly apparition, that's actually the illusion. Evil is the illusion. That's not real. What is real is this. And so you have to make yourself real. That's part of the process. You have to become real and become what God made you to be and what you were designed to be.
Yep.
That we're just a ghost of at this stage of the book.
Yeah.
And later on, and I don't think you quote this later, so I'll cite it here, Dan, there's another one of these ghosts who is trying to walk on the grass. It's like, ow, ow, ow. And his heavenly guide says, don't worry, you'll get solider and you'll be able to handle this. And then as you come deeper up and deeper in, it's even harder, but you'll be able to do this. And then he tries to go in the water, and he can like walk on it because he can't even sink into the water.
Yeah. And what we find here is that these interactions with reality are too painful for some of these ghosts. Some of them actually just return to the bus.
Yep.
They're like, no, I want nothing to do with this. Right.
And does that remind us of ourselves sometimes in our inability? Dan and I's theology, Ally, is that heaven is the ability to accept reality and conform ourselves to eternal truths and reality. And we're in hell when we can't accept that. So this validates our priors.
Oh, yeah. I can see why you like this book.
Yeah. So in the Book of Mormon, we read that the Spirit teaches things as they really are. It points us to reality. And one of Jeff and I, one of our favorite authors, M. Scott Peck, he taught in numerous places that one of the foundational keys to mental health is a willingness to live in reality. And the reason why we don't do that is because it's hard. Reality, like really living in reality, is so hard. Okay.
Yeah. And this, the Space Trilogy by Lewis really has this kind of idea where it's been a while since I've read it, but it's like he is in his office and then he comes back or something. And it's like a shifting of the reality that is real. Like this idea of us being just kind of lost children, and we need to be put on just like we've said, like we need to be solid again. And to me, it's such a hopeful message because it's saying, and he gets into this later, just the joy that is coming. It's way better than we could imagine. It's way better than our small-sided, ghostly houses that we built, And so it's just really a message of hope. The whole book is hopeful.
Yeah. And again, notice the anti-dualism here, right? Heaven and hell aren't mirrors.
Yeah.
Right.
Hell is this ethereal, immaterial, and heaven is like this weighty, solid, real place.
Yeah. So we're starting to see, like Jeff said, he's really breaking with William Blake at this point. Early in the book,
he's throwing it down with him right now.
Yep. Absolutely. So now let's talk about, they start having some encounters. Okay. These ghosts start having encounters, having discussions with each other.
And our narrator and his guide are pretty much eavesdropping on this. Yeah. They're kind of observing them, different ones.
That's right. So here we have a discussion where you have a man who is, I don't know how to describe this soul. I guess he's kind of entitled. I think that's the word I would use, but his language, he's talking about his rights and what he's entitled to. And he says, I'm just telling you the sort of chap I was. See, I'm asking for nothing but my rights. You may think you can put me down because you're dressed up like that, which you weren't when you worked under me. And I'm only a poor man, but I got to have my rights, same as you, see? And then this spirit who is actually, developing the paradigm of heaven, right? He counters by saying, oh no, it's not so bad as that. I haven't got my rights, or I should not be here. You will not get yours either. You'll get something far better. Never fear. So think about this. The ghost is asserting his rights. He's saying, I'm entitled to things. And the spirit, who is, again, he's moving in the direction of heaven. He's saying, no. I don't have rights and you don't either. What's being offered us is so much better than rights. Okay. And so the entitled man again says, that's just what I say. I haven't got my rights. I always done my best and I never done nothing wrong. And what I don't see is why I should be put below a bloody murderer like you. He's thinking about what he's entitled to. He's comparing himself and thinking in terms of hierarchies and who is above and below whom. And the spirit says, murdering old Jack wasn't the worst thing I did. That was the work of a moment, and I was half mad when I did it. But I murdered you in my heart deliberately for years. I used to lie awake at nights thinking what I'd do to you if I ever got the chance. That is why I have been sent to you now, to ask your forgiveness and to be your servant as long as you need one, and longer if it pleases you. I was the worst, but all the men who worked under you felt the same. You made it hard for us, and you made it hard for your wife too, and for your children. Wow. This is fascinating. So this is a spirit who had actually committed a murder, right? And had sort of ruminated over the possibility of committing another murder, killing this guy who he's talking to. And he says that as a result, he's been sent to him to serve him and ask his forgiveness. And he'll serve him as long as is necessary. That's incredible, right?
Yeah. One thing I love about Lewis is he just goes right in there for the tough things. He's not scared of talking about difficult subjects such as, can a murderer be forgiven? And what's the hierarchies of sin? And so he starts right here. I think there's a reason he starts with murder, because it's like, well, that's the worst thing you can do. And he shows that the murderer is the one in heaven, right? And so we have to, what? just right at the beginning kind of turned around. How is this possible? And I think he really wants to emphasize from the beginning that it's all pride. It's all about pride. Pride is the sin. And in Dante's Purgatorio, which I do think is kind of similar to this, Dante, when he's entering purgatory, you have to go up 7 levels. And on each level, you're kind of atoning for the sin that you did. So if it was the first one's pride, then envy, then avarice or whatever, you go up the chain. But the first one is the hardest, and that's pride. And so you get on your forehead 7 P's, which symbolize the 7 levels. And once you get through the pride circle, the level for pride, then that P disappears and all the other ones lighten. Okay, so they're all like kind of faded. And you start to be able to go up a lot faster. Like it gets easier. And C.S. Lewis in this book talks about that, how once you get through this stage, you can go on like a house on fire. Like it gets so much easier. But this man is just so, I want my rights. He's so about what he deserves.
Yes.
And so I really like that it starts with this, so we can see, okay, this is really pride is the issue with most of these people that we're going to encounter.
And again, you said C.S. Lewis goes there, right? Because here we've got a murderer teaching someone who says, I've never done anything wrong to anybody. Yeah. And here's a murderer
like trying to tell him. Right?
Yeah. and so the self-selection thing, you remind me, even in Inferno, Dante, you've got Lucifer, Satan, who's imprisoned in the lake, and it's like it's hot as hell. We say it's hot as hell, and we say it's cold as hell. Well, in Dante, it is a frozen lake that Satan is imprisoned in, and he's a fallen angel. And the reason why is he's trying to escape, and so his wings are flapping, which makes it really cold, even though hell is hot. And so Satan has imprisoned himself in hell due to his pride of refusing to just submit. Yeah. So it's even there. That's kind of a cool image, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right off the bat, we're hearing some of the paradigms of hell. What are these things that keep people trapped in that mindset and that paradigm of hell? And pride and entitlement we're seeing right off the bat in this initial discussion.